you have questions about dog training? Do you have a question about your dog? How to help your dog do something or not do something? Would you like some suggestions for some great toys for your dog? Some fun things you could do with your dog? Some awesome classes you can take with your dog? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you should go ahead and book a free consult with a School for the Dogs trainer. A School for the Dogs certified professional trainer is waiting to take your call. You can go ahead and book a free virtual dog training session now at schoolforthedogs.com/free consult. My name is Annie Grossman, and I'm a dog trainer. I'm the owner and co-founder of School for the Dogs, a dog training center located in Manhattan's East Village.
School for the dogs, for the dogs. School for the dogs, for the dogs.
On this podcast, I talk about dog training, interview industry experts, discuss pet trends, answer questions, and try to communicate my love for all things related to behavioral science. Thanks a lot for listening. I think this podcast will help make you the best possible human best friend any dog could ask for. Hello, Beth. Thank you for being here. Maybe you can just go ahead and introduce yourself, because I'm worried I'm going to say your last name wrong. and tell me the name of your business and where you're located.
Absolutely. Yeah, everybody worries about saying my last name. I'm Beth Berkobien of Rehab Your Rescue. We're located in Dallas, Texas, but I do sessions virtually all over the world. I have some clients in South Africa, in London, in Seattle, so we are very accessible. I have a master's degree in animal behavior from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm certified in separation anxiety, and I have over 25 years experience. And then I have 3 members on my team that just do basics, cooperative care and reactivity and such like that. But I specialize in aggression and the aggressive dog, specifically the rescue dog that has problems.
And which leads to the name of your business.
Yes, that is actually, I was supporting a rescue. And when I decided to go full time again after a 8-year break, I was like, I need a new business name. And I'm like, well, all I do is rescues. So I was like, Rehab Your Rescue. And it stuck, and it's kind of driven me along the rescue world. So it's really nice.
So tell me how you got started in this world.
So I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin. We had Semitol cattle, quarter horses, and my dad actually trained field trial Labradors, and he used aversives. And we'd bring out these bouncy labs, and they were so fun. And at the beginning of our sessions, it was just such a joy to work with them. But then I'd always notice at the end of the sessions, we'd have these shut down kids who were slinking back to their kennels. And I was like, it felt wrong being a 12-year-old. It just didn't feel right.
Can you explain a little bit what the aversives were that were being used?
Yeah, so this was in the 1980s. So we had one of those leather collars that actually had nails in them, 3 little nails. And if the dogs did something they didn't like, my dad would make a big leash correction. We used e-collars, which of course in the 1980s weren't great. He used a bonker, so just like Jeff Gellman, he would be whacking on these dogs if they wouldn't release.
Oh my God, I just discovered Jeff Gellman.
Oh, I'm so sorry that you've gone all this time without knowing who he was.
I'm glad I went all this time.
I know, and now you do know. Go back to the darkness.
Well, maybe we could talk about him. But anyway, what is a bonker?
So a bonker is something like a rolled up towel, or my dad would use a retrieving dummy and essentially would just whack the dog with it when they didn't do what was expected of them. And a lot of the compulsive trainers will use it if a dog is overreacting or aggressing or being reactive, and they'll throw it at them to hit in the head or on the hips. It's supposed to break the mindset. Really, all it does is shut the dog down and causes the dog to be fearful of the handler because they know for sure who it's coming from. Mm-hmm. And so, if they weren't fetching correctly or they wouldn't release a bird, they'd get a bonk on the head or hip. And it made him drop the bird or made him drop the retrieval, but it it didn't teach them anything, right? It just taught
Yeah.
them that we were unpredictable and now we're scared of you.
So how did you go from thinking this makes me a little uncomfortable to where you are now?
I decided that I wanted to be a veterinarian as a kid, which I think most kids that are really animal crazy are like, oh, I want to be a veterinarian.
Yeah, I
And so
did
when I
too,
went to
except I think I knew I couldn't like deal with the dead dogs and also not good at science, and felt also like if you like animals, the only job out there is being a vet.
right. Yeah,
Like
especially in like the 1980s,
mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about dog training.
And
And there wasn't pet dog training, it seems like it is now.
mm-hmm. Right. So
So I went
go
to
ahead.
school
Mm-hmm.
and we did this day where you could go into surgeries and you could watch surgeries happening. And I promptly passed out.
Wait, this
And
was
so I
what
was,
in vet school?
yeah, before. So right when I joined for my undergrad, you could go and watch like surgeries happening and they kind of had this open house day.
Oh, so you were like
And
pre-vet or pre-med?
yes, yep, was
Mm-hmm.
going to be pre-vet. And yep, nope, passed right out. So I was like, okay, well, I can't deal with blood or guts, which was interesting because I grew up on a farm and had dealt with, doctoring animals my whole life, but yet seeing the insides of an animal is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I passed out. So I was like, yeah, we're not doing that. So I changed tracks and I was like, well, I think I'll be a human psychologist. So I started taking, or I got my undergrad in behavioral psych for people. And at the end of my undergrad, and I was going to move on to getting a master's in psych for people, it just didn't feel right. And I was very young and I was very bold and I was very opinionated. And so I would get very frustrated with people when they wouldn't put their behavior plan in place when I was doing my clinicals. So a professor very gently steered me towards zoology. And so I got a master's degree in zoology with an emphasis in animal behavior. Yeah, I'd be less frustrated with animals, that if I went towards an animal track, that I wasn't very skilled with dealing with people and I would get very impatient with them, which as now that I'm in my 40s, this entire job is people. So, but I spent the first 10 years of my career just doing board and trains for a company. And so I was very isolated from them because I think they did understand I didn't have very good people skills. So I had to learn how to people because I wasn't very good at it. And I was one of those people who's like, I hate people. And now I don't think that's a badge of honor.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's certainly a stereotype about people who work with dogs, right?
Yes, for sure. I've heard that all the time. Like, I really don't like people, so I'm going to be a dog trainer. And I'm like, well, then go where you never have to talk to a person, because that's all I do all day long is talk to people and empathize with them and feel with them. And I have to have this level of understanding of how they're feeling, because especially in behavior, it's a journey that we're taking together where they're going to feel so terribly isolated and so terribly alone. And I have to be their guide and I have to be the one who is taking them on this journey. And if I'm not supportive of them, who is going to be? So I learned that, but it took me 40 years to do that.
Well, I find I mean, business owner to business owner, I can tell you that I find working in a service business to be such a trial by fire as far as working with people goes.
Yes.
That working in my previous career, in school, in life, and relationships in general, I never had to deal with so many people wanting so many things, both on the client end and on the employee end.
Yes.
And it definitely teaches you. I feel like it's been quite an education in psychology, both mine and others.
Yes, for
I
sure.
I think some people probably could go their whole life without having, if you live I guess a more cloistered life, or even don't go into the service business, because it's just the volume of people that you are dealing with on both sides becomes huge, and you start to see, I don't know, like behavioral tendencies and I don't know, like personality types. And I mean, one thing I've learned, I love working with clients, and I love working with trainers, but it's certainly not easy. And it's a
Not
different,
at all.
well, behavior. And I've talked a little bit on the podcast about this before, like trying to figure out how to run a business based on what I've learned about behavior from like working in the realm of dog behavior. Like, sure, there are a lot of things that overlap, as far as, why people do what they do or don't do what they don't do and what motivates people. But it's like a whole different skill set.
Right, for sure.
That
Yeah.
I appreciate, like the world of human relations in a way that I never did before becoming a dog trainer. Anyway, sorry to go down that that tangent.
No, I
But
agree.
it's interesting to me that you were like, you went to work with, you went into the world of working with animals because you were not so interested in working with the people, but now you're saying you're working with the people. Do you think what you learned about animal training first as a zoologist helped inform how you work with people?
Yes. And I think also having that behavior psych degree helps. So it all kind of feeds together because it's all linked. It's all behavior. It's all functional. So we always have to look at what is the function of that behavior that either a human or an animal is doing, and why are they doing it? And then once you dig into that, you can find your empathy and you can find the way to address it in a non-confrontational or non-aversive way. It did take me, as I think it does most people, time to develop skills to deal with people appropriately. And I also have an MBA in finance and spent 15 years as a corporate controller in corporate America. So that also lent me, and I worked for the fire service side for 5 years. And so working with firefighters and corporate America, that taught me quite a bit as well of how to really learn how to listen to people and not be reactive, because I was a very reactive youngster. So it really taught me quite a bit coming up. And then I put a pause in 2008. I put a pause on my dog training career because of the economy. And, I just wasn't in a right place in my life. And then in 2017, I started back into the dog training world with supporting rescues. And, really that's all I did was for a few years, just support rescues. As their behavior consultant, I'd take cases that they were having problems with, but I wouldn't really see the outside client. And then in 2020, when COVID hit and I was working in oil and gas, I was absolutely miserable and I hated my job. I hated what I was doing, but I was working part-time as a behavior consultant and I was seeing probably 20 clients a week on top of my corporate job. And then one day I just woke up and I looked at my husband and said, I think I'm going to quit my job on Monday. And he's like, okay, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to go back to dog training full time. And he was like, ooh, okay. In the middle of COVID. And he's a retired firefighter paramedic and he was working the pandemic in an emergency department. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be in corporate America. I feel awful. I'm miserable. I'm depressed. I just don't want to. And he's like, okay, well, let's give it a college try for 3 to 6 months. And if you aren't successful, you can always just go back to corporate America. Sound like a deal? And I was like, sounds like a plan. And now 2.5 years later, we are thriving. I'm growing my team. And it's been an exceptional ride in the last 2.5 years since I've gone back full time. It's been quite the exceptional ride.
So just chronologically, you were training full time and then you left?
2001 to 2008, I was training full time. And
was that with your own business or a board and train business?
The board and train business in Wisconsin. And that was aversive based. So it was prong collars and not as heavy handed as like what my dad was doing. And it was right as I had graduated college. And so actually it was before that. It was before I graduated from college, because when I graduated from college, I shifted to positive reinforcement 1.0, where when positive reinforcement first kind of came out, everybody was still kind of using mild aversives like shaker cans and squirt bottles. And so I still use those types of things. And every once in a while, a prong collar would appear. But mostly from 2001 or 2 on, I stopped with the majority of the aversives, at least the prong collars, e-collars, choke chains. But the first company I worked for was very much a compulsive / balance company. When I left them after I got my degree, because I was working part-time while I was getting my education, I started working for another company that all I did was board and trains.
How did you come to feel that the balanced method was not the direction you wanted to go in?
Oh, that's a really good question. I wrecked one of my own dogs. So I just told this story on TikTok the other day. I was trying to get a UDX, a utility dog excellence, on my Rottweiler, and he was really lagging in his heel. Like his heel, just his off-leash heel was not polished enough, and I kept DQing in the healing portions. And the judges just kept telling me that I needed to firm up the heel. It needed to be more polished. It wasn't crisp enough. And so I had a friend and colleague talk me into trying her trainer and that we should try an e-collar. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And she's like, showed me her dog that he had polished up, and it was this goofy lab who was still a goofy lab because labs are resilient. And she was doing amazing with this dog. And I was like, okay, it'll work for Elmo. Let's try it on Elmo. And I think we took about 3 to 6 months to get the dog conditioned to the e-collar, and we moved really slowly. And then we started working in the training center on rubber mats with, go ahead.
Was this after 2008?
So I came out of the program and was starting to make my transition away from using tools. And I had really never used an e-collar in the program I was working with. The first company I worked for. We just used prong collars and choke chains. We didn't use an e-collar. And I got convinced that this was the way to go by a friend, and because she showed me her dog, and I was like, well, okay. And we started working him in the training facility, which had rubber floors. And it took about 30 minutes. And all of a sudden I started to notice that he was just shutting down and shutting down and shutting down. So he came into the training facility, this really happy, goofy guy. And he was a really exuberant, outgoing dude. And he all of a sudden started like tucking his little nub in, and then his ears were plastered against his head, and he had low, slinky body language. And when I would ask him to heel, he would plaster himself against my thigh, which was exactly what I wanted, but not in the way that looked like a polished heel. He was slammed against me with, low, slinky body language, wide eyes, panting mouth. And I can remember distinctly the way he looked. And I was like, that doesn't look great. And they kept telling me, I was like, hey, this doesn't look like it's doing what I want it to do. He looks unhappy. And the trainer and my friend were like, oh, no. Just the first time's always a little rough. It'll get better. So we left after that session, and I came back. And 2 weeks later, and the second he stepped on the rubber mats, he pissed and shit himself, and he started shaking, and he just was like, he started slinking to the ground, and he started belly crawling, and I was like, oh, well, that's not great. And he's like, just put the e-collar on, we have to work through this. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't feel good in my stomach, I don't think that's right. And so I took him outside, and I got him, I didn't put the collar on, and I took him outside, and I got him all jazzed up and boistered up, and he recovered probably about 80%. And I was like, okay, let's do this. And we walked back into the training center. His feet hit the rubber mat, and he went, and he shut right back down again, peed himself again. And I was like, oh no. And both my friend and the trainer were like, this is normal. And I'm like, is it though? And then that's when I was like, this is not normal. And I have wrecked my dog, and this is not great. And I could never get him back onto rubber mats again. We tried to counter condition it and desensitize it back, and I could never get him to walk on rubber mats again. I could get him into training facilities and tool around, but if there were rubber mats, he wasn't having it. He could play on them, but if I tried to put him to work, he would shut down. And I took about 5 years to try to get him together, and unfortunately I wasn't able to recover that from him. So I made a very stupid mistake. I was still very young. I was 25, 26. And I just really wanted I really wanted this title, and I was very competitive. I showed at the top of the quarter horse circuit and, won some big prizes there. And I was a very competitive young girl. And I was just more about winning the prize than I was about the well-being of my dog. And that is what taught me to worry more about my dog and less about myself. And that's when I took tools off and I stopped using them from that moment forward. And I've never picked up an e-collar again.
How did you go from there to also sort of doing away with things that people might consider less severe, like coins in a can?
Yeah, that
Or
took a
soy
little bit
bottle.
longer. Yeah, that took a little bit longer because that was still very much the norm in the early 90s, early 2000s. Like that was how, quote unquote, how we were training, right? And so I remember when I got my first English setter puppy, I used a shaker can on him and it shut him, and I think it was for barking. And it just like he hit the deck and belly crawled away from me, and I was like, "Oh, that's not great." And I think that was the first time I had seen that, and I was like, "Okay." And so I stopped. I think my poor dogs have been. I think for most of us have been experiments in what not to do, and so I think I've tried things on my own dogs and then gone, "Ooh, that's not great. Let's not do it on your dog either." And then I started getting even, taking continuing education and learning and, reading Don't Shoot the Dog. And, of course, continuing to read Dr. McConnell's books. And you just keep educating yourself. And I just kept seeing things would be like, you'd be in a class and there would be dogs barking and you'd squirt one and they would like hit the deck and be like, "Oh," and you'd be like, "Well, that's not the response I want. I don't want the dogs to be afraid of me. We want the dogs to figure out how to act instead of being just terrified all the time." So I think a lot of it's trial by fire for most of us. Even with educations, we have to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And like with my new setter puppy, it's about figuring out what works for him and what doesn't work. But yeah, it took a long time to come away from aversives. I would say when I ended, so probably about 2005 is when I really set all of them down. When I was like, okay, there's a better way. I had, continued to learn, continued to go to seminars and such. And was like, okay, there's a better way that we can just redirect and we can ask dogs to do something else instead of trying to scare them into submission.
Here's a question. I have family that uses a shock collar, or they've used several kinds of shock collars on their dogs and continue to. And their rationale of why it's okay is that the dog only ever got shocked once and it wasn't that bad. So if it means that the dog can have free roam of their yard, it was worth it. What would you, I'm not putting you on the spot, how would you respond to
yeah, and I
making
get that a lot, right?
Small?
Yeah, and I think we get that a lot. One, we don't get to decide what's that bad, right? Just because you, as a human, think, "Oh, it's not that bad." And I think the biggest flaw we have with the e-collar is that all trainers will have you try it on the heel of your hand. That is the most callous part of your body. And they won't tell you that human skin is 14 to 18 cells thick and dog skin is 4 to 8 cells thick. So we're not comparing apples to apples, right? And so what I've said to clients lately, because I get a lot of clients that come in on e-collars and I'll be like, okay, I want to give you a challenge. Go home with no shoes on. I want you to strap it to your inner thigh and just wander around and give it to your partner or a friend or child and have them stim you when you least expect it. And then tell me if it's painful. And then tell me if it made you jump. Because the reason the e-collars work is because it's aversive, because it's painful. And what they learn is that when that collar is on, like I have one client who I have not pulled the e-collar off of yet because it's a very big, very strong, very reactive German Shepherd. And I want her to have tools before I take her other tools away. We will take them away. And I've told her, I said, you can wear it because the dog is what we call collar wise. So the dog knows when that collar's on, there is a chance that I'm going to get stimmed. Even if he's only been stimmed once, there is a chance. They know, they're very smart. And so for this particular dog, I'm like, just leave the collar on. I know you never use the box. Let's not hit the button. And then we'll move away from that e-collar. And so really it's more about the learning history that the dog has been through, and that single learning events are very real. So if that dog was booking towards the road and you stemmed them and they hit the brakes and came back, you're like, yep, that worked. And I've never had to hit it again. They're like, yeah, because they don't want to get hurt again. And they've learned that collar is painful. And I think the good balance trainers will tell you, yeah, it works because it's painful. It's not a tickle. It's not an interrupter. It's not a communication device. It's aversive and it's painful. And I think as long as we're honest with ourselves, if you're okay with causing a sentient being pain so that you have control over them, then go for it. But let's be honest with ourselves what we're doing to our animals, not that, oh, it's just so they can have freedom. They have no more freedom on that e-collar than they would on a long line.
So what do you say when someone says, well, it just snaps them out of it?
Yeah, it doesn't though. It causes pain, and then they associate that pain with whatever is happening. So if we use it for aggression, and I always like to bring up this point, I always tell my clients too, go home, open your owner's manual, and read the very first page, and tell me what it says. And then they'll always come back the next day or the next time I see them and say, it says not to use for aggression. And I'm like, I know. Crazy, huh? That's why I wanted you to look there. Don't use for aggression and don't use for punishment. So then if we're not using it for aggression, we're not using it for punishment, what should we be using these tools for? And
if you're not using it for punishment, you're not using it for aggression, you should be using it on humans who are into S&M.
Yes, there we go. Right?
Find some animal for whom this is going to be something that's positively reinforcing.
And can consent to it, right? So if I can consent to having a violet wand used on me, then, which is the electric device that is used in S&M, not that I know anything about that. Oh boy, did we just go down a path. So if I can consent to a violet wand, that's completely different. That's me saying, yes, please use that. And then I can also say, whoa, that's too much, and tap out, right? Whereas we don't give dogs, and they don't have the ability to tap out. And I've even seen trainers that have fried dogs on e-collars, and they are screaming, and they're holding that button down and saying, well, when they stop screaming, I'll let it up. Essentially, that dog is saying, you've gone too far, stop, and we're still not listening. So if we're going to use those devices, we have to listen carefully to what the dog is saying and watch for that consent.
I try and make the point that we don't know what associations the dog is making. So your dog gets shocked while running towards that UPS truck. And for all we know, the UPS truck is the thing that's been associated with the pain.
Right. Or I had a dog that had separation anxiety, went off to a board and train. They put the dog in an impact kennel, and every time she barked, they fried her on the e-collar until she stopped barking and start screaming. When the dog came home, and the dog was a lovely, sociable dog, and when the dog came home, she was now human aggressive. So she associated that stim with people that were not her family. And so we've been, I think we're 9 months into a program now trying to work through the human aggression, but she is very suspicious of humans and will bark, lunge, growl, show big displays of aggression towards humans that are not her family. And it has been a long road to counter condition that. Yep.
Are you familiar with the monks of New Skeet?
Oh, yes. Who isn't? Well, I guess if you didn't know Jeff Gellman, then maybe.
Well, the monks of New Skeet have been around since I was a little kid, and their latest book is about using a shock collar. And if I had it nearby, I would read to you from it. But I do recall one of the things they talk about is that the vibration is actually more disturbing and painful to the dog than the shock, and which I don't know how.
I don't think we get to decide that. We don't get to decide that.
Right. And I don't know, maybe I wonder if there have been studies that have been done on that. I don't know. But then they also talk about testing it on yourself and the different levels of what's painful and how it's might like one level might be more painful for one person than another, which made me ask myself, well, if you could say that, then how can you also say that it's not that bad on the dog? Like, if you don't know how if I don't know how my spouse feels wearing this thing, how can I expect to guess what it feels like to the dog?
Right. And that's exactly it. Like, why do you get to say? So you don't get to tell me what I find unpleasant. So why do you get to tell me what my dog finds or doesn't find unpleasant? And what one dog may find unpleasant, another dog isn't going to. And so I do a lot of deaf and blind dogs. I've had several of my own deaf and blind dogs. And I have used the vibe collar very sparingly and only if the dog can tolerate it. And the way I start a vibe collar is, I'll put it near them. And if they have and vibrate it. And if the dog has a big response to that, then clearly that's going to be aversive to them and we're not going to be able to use that on them. So the dog gets to decide. So yeah, if I put a vibe collar on the dog and the dog has a, oh, holy crap response, then we're not going to use it. Mm-hmm. And just like with the stim, so it should be the same way with the stim, that if we put it on and why do we have to find a working level? Shouldn't it just be that if we put the collar on and we stim the dog and the dog comes apart, we go, oh, okay, we're not using that collar then.
If you want to use a remote tool, why not use something that makes a sound? That if it's really about, breaking your dog's attention, or I forget the other ways people put it, but
communicating.
If it's really about communicating or just getting their attention, why not just use a collar that can make a simple sound?
Right.
So you go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add one thing to that. And what drives me crazy about this whole argument about e-collars is that, and really e-collars, prong collars, choke chains, and the comparison to positive only, quote unquote, or force free or R plus, which positive only isn't a thing, is that, well, we don't want to use treats all the time. I don't want to have to carry treats. I don't want treats in my pockets. I don't want to have to use treats. But you're okay with leaving that device on 100% of the time and telling your client never take that collar off, but yet you're not okay with them using treats because you don't want to have that be a crutch. Isn't your tool the same thing? Isn't your tool a crutch? Because in my line of work, we fade treats. Like, we get to a point where we're not feeding every repetition. So I want that same thing. I want to be away from the tools. And I eventually want, if I have the dog on a head halter or a harness, I want the dog away from that and on a flat collar at some point. So we should be striving to be fading everything away and not being like, we can't use treats, but that collar, that's gold and you can leave that on all the time. And so I think it's such an interesting dichotomy, the argument that we have.
Would you mind going into about Jeff Gellman with me? Because I really just discovered him like a week ago. Can you explain who he is or how you came to know about him and when? Because I guess my ire has so long been focused on Cesar Millan that I did not know about this person who, by the way, is not as influential overall as Cesar Millan, but nefarious, although I would say maybe differently nefarious, but you go ahead.
Yeah, I think he has a different reach. He's not on national television, which is a blessing. So I think the good part about Jeff is that he's not on national TV. Jeff is, I think I heard about him probably about 10 years ago, and for his famous bonking method, which is where he takes a rolled up newspaper, and if the dog is doing something aggressive, he whacks them with it, whether that's over the head or on the hips. It's usually over the head. And then he's like, see, it stopped it. And I'm like, yeah, because if you hit me in the face with something too, I'd stop. And he says that he takes really aggressive code red dogs and fixes them, which I think is problematic because we shouldn't be seeking to fix a dog. We should be seeking to repair their behaviors, and some dogs are not fixable. So I think that becomes very problematic in another conversation. But he's not just using aversives.
I think if I were, I would say, not to edit you, but I would say less about being fixable as far as like some dogs just aren't ever going to be right for the environment that we're asking them.
Right. Yes.
Without great accommodations, but yeah, go ahead.
Correct. Yeah. Like, that's why we have mental facilities and prisons. So I think Jeff is go ahead.
No, yeah, he's a compulsion trainer.
Oh yeah, he's compulsive 100%. And he doesn't just use aversives, he uses abusive methods. Like he is hitting dogs to get them to stop what they're doing. I will go down these rabbit holes sometimes for emotional cutting and to be like, oh, thank God I don't do that, and to make myself mad. And I've watched quite a few of his videos, and it just boggles my mind. Like, how do you not understand basic learning theory and that this is not how dogs learn, and that when a dog is in distress, you're not going to get them out of it by hitting them with something and shutting them down. Sure, it snaps them out of it. Absolutely. But it's not teaching them anything. Just like if your kid was drawing on the wall right now with a permanent marker and I threw a book at him, he's not going to learn not to draw on the wall. He's going to turn around and go, whoo, that Beth is scary and I don't want her in my house. And then next time I come over, he's going to be like, Mom, why is Beth here? Because I'm now unpredictable.
So I got to Jeff Gellman because I'm actually writing a book right now about good dog training. And it's not at all a memoir, but I was writing a little bit about sort of how I was writing a little bit about like what dog training was to me when I was a kid, and and a lot of what I learned from my dad as a kid were methods that I think he learned from Barbara Woodhouse, who was on the BBC in the early 80s. She was like this very matronly, stern old lady who was going around yanking dogs' leashes and stepping on their leashes to get them to lie down, and just doing a lot of but she also suggested things a lot of the time that were just kind of I don't know, just like weird things that I remember my dad doing. I didn't make this connection until after my dad died, so I can't talk to him about it, unfortunately. But I remember he would say, like, what a good girl, that it was really important to use that W sound to communicate with dogs. And subsequently, I saw that on her show, on, reruns of her show, like that's something she suggests. So, and my dad, I also remember used to say that if the dog was bad, I should bite the dog's ear. And I was like, oh, I wonder if he got that from Barbara Woodhouse. So I Googled, it's kind of hard to find clips of Barbara Woodhouse's show, or certainly searchable clips. But I guess I Googled like Barbara Woodhouse bite dog ear or something like that. Maybe there was some clip of her doing that, and that's how my dad learned about dog training. I mean, part of the irony of it all is my dad was an extremely gentle, kind, generous person. So that he was that he believed that all of this was fine says something about how much people will believe about gobbledygook,
right,
dog training and snake oil. He was also a really smart man. Anyway, so I got to this blog post on a website called animalrightsandwrongs.uk, and it was called Just When You Thought the Woodhouse Days Were Over. And it's a very interesting blog post by this guy, John Brookland, about how we got from the 1980s, 1970s Barbara Woodhouse days to this guy, Jeff Gellman. And then he shows this video, which I was just like, whoa. Can I share it with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, back to the Brittany that grabs kids. Kids could just be sitting on chair and will walk by and bite feet.
Okay.
I think it's like a Q&A of some kind.
So what you need to do is you get a
Gotcha.
remote power on that dog. That dog walks by kids and tries to bite their feet. You let that dog know that's not acceptable. We're not living like this.
Oh, sorry, just to pause that. I also like Googling him a little bit. It looks like I couldn't figure out any education that he has.
None.
Any certification. The only previous experience I could find was that he ran a sex shop at some point.
Oh, awesome. I think that is means you should be a dog trainer. It's like a guy we have here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I looked at the people working for him, hoping that they would have some sort of experience or certification or something, and also couldn't. But anyway, I'll continue playing this. I think it's
Excellent.
a Q&A. It's him and a woman.
I think his wife.
Okay. With a bunch of dog paintings behind them. And he's this like kind of nerdy looking guy with glasses and a receding hairline and long hair draped over his shoulders. I'm trying to give a visual description. But button down shirt. Almost kind of like a young, possibly less attractive Bernie Sanders with long hair. That's what I would describe.
Yep.
That's what you do. Thank you for put it into context. So that's what you do. And some people would be like, oh my God, it's going to think kids. It's going to think kids are what? It's going to think kids are hot? I hope so. I hope when it sees kids' feet, it moves away. That's what I hope it does. But a lot of people are going to say, oh, then it'll have a negative association with children. And what? Bite them? It's already biting them. I don't create bad behaviors. I fix them. I know that sounds a little bit corny, but I think it's really, really important because a lot of people come in after the fact and say, no, that'll make the dog. I'm like, no. You know, Boston Mommy called me up on the phone and said, hey, Jeff, I'm having a problem with my dog. Hey, Boston Mommy, what's going on? My dog goes by kids and bites their feet. Okay, wonderful. Have I ever met the dog before? No, you haven't, Jeff. Have we ever talked on the phone before? No, you haven't, Jeff. Have you ever done any of my advice before? Nope, Jeff, I haven't. Great. And the dog is still doing the bad behavior. I had nothing to do with it. I think it's so important that people understand the sequence of a dog's bad behavior, that dog trainers like myself aren't creating them at all. But there's a whole segment of the marketplace out there that are trying to convince you that no, punishment makes all these dogs behave bad. We show up after the scene of the crime. Got it? We show up at the scene of the crime. All we do is stop unwanted behaviors all day long once the dog has done them. It's so important that people understand that and that they stop getting sucked into this punishment makes dogs lose trust in the owner. Fucking Boston Mommy, if that was my dog, I already don't trust my dog. I don't trust it. If my dog was biting kids' feet, there already is a lack of trust. That's already done. This is so important that people understand these concepts. This is simple, common sense. But as soon as you start talking about punishment, everybody crumbles and falls apart and screams abuse. Abuse? Give me a fucking break. How about those kids that are getting bit? It's incredible the way that we've gotten in this country. You have to fucking be kidding me. That dog is biting children's feet? What would you like to do? What should we do? Drop kibble on the fucking floor? Oh yeah, every time the Brittany walks by the kids, drop kibble on the floor so it'll think the kids' feet are nice. Yeah. Let's also wash the kids' feet with like essential oils and tea tree oil and put flowers in their fucking toes so the dog feels that it's a loving fucking place, and maybe it'll sit there and kumbaya too. Give me a fucking break. The dog's biting the kid's feet. It's going to be told right now, this second, how unacceptable this is. That's why dogs are dying. That's why dogs are being rehomed. That's why children are getting bits. Because we've turned into a society of a bunch of snowflakes who refuse to accept reality. And on that note, Linda's done with the show. That's why she keeps squeezing my arm. Is that what you meant?
No, I was trying to make you calm down. Like, calm your shit down, dude.
I'm not mad either. I'm not angry.
He's just passionate.
I'm fucking passionate, TM.
Yeah.
All right? I'm not mad at all. I love life. I'm having a great time. But boy, am I sick and tired of people making all these excuses. This isn't Boston Mommy, and Boston Mommy knows that because she's been on the show. These are just like to all of you, maybe not the people sitting here, but to people out there that are struggling. I mean, it's really getting bad out there, and it's getting worse. We get too many snowflakes, we're gonna have a fucking snowstorm. We got a snowstorm, we're gonna be shoveling shit for a long time, guys. And that's gonna be the bodies of dead dogs.
Oh my God. For me, it's the fear mongering. It's well, your dog's going to die if you don't use an e-collar. Your dog's going to die if you don't use an e-collar. Okay, stop that. Okay. So I have a client that is having severe separation anxiety, severe reactivity, and has been to 5 balance trainers, and it's not getting better. It's getting worse. And we were supposed to start a program, and the dog bit another dog and did some damage, and so she has to remove the dog from her house. The apartment's kicking the dog out. So she calls me, and we do a session, and she says, well, I'm going to go to this trainer. And I'm like, again, it's a balance trainer that's going to use the same methods. And she's like, yep, she told me it was going to be the same thing. And I was like, great. Well, then I talked to this trainer, and I was like, yeah, it's the same methods, because they make these promises and they're so passionate, like Jeff is. And I'm assuming because you're recording him with F-bombs, you're okay with us using F-bombs. It's fucking bullshit. Like, it's basic learning theory. Like, yes, so if you stim a dog or you punish a dog around that kid, he's just going to be like, oh my God, that kid's so unpredictable. And now I just want to keep distance. I want to create more distance from the kid, because what is aggression? It's a distance creating behavior. So and what did he say it was? Wait, did he say the dog was an Aussie? No, a Brittany. A Brittany. So Brittany's, like, if it was an Aussie, I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, the kids, we just need to fulfill the dog's biological needs of herding. And that's why he's biting the heels and ankles, is because that's his behavior. That's what he does. If a Brittany is biting a child, and my specialty is the bird dog, like that's my jam. That's what I do. I have 2 setters in my home right now. I have probably 30 bird dogs of varying breeds in my program: GSPs, Brittany's, German Wirehair Pointers, Vizslas. I love the bird dog. Brittany's are such sensitive animals. So if a Brittany is biting a child, I want to find out the function. WTF. And not what the fuck. What the function? Why is the dog biting that child's feet? What has happened to cause that dog biting the dog's feet? And let's put some management in place. So if the dog is biting the kid's feet, the dog doesn't go near the kids until we can start a program. And not a punishment-based one, because you're just going to make that kid or that dog think that kids are unpredictable and scary. And it's not going to just be going after your child. It's going to start going after everyone else's kids, and it's going to be a death sentence. Absolutely right, Jeff. You're going to put that dog to death because you are the one that's telling people to punish when it comes to kids. And does suppression work? Sometimes. Does it backfire? Most of the time. Most of the time. If we try suppression, see, he was fired up, and now I'm fired up.
No, you can't not be fired up. I mean, I think I go towards the my brain just goes to management first. Like,
Yes.
if you have a dog who's biting a kid's feet, like, we control so much about our dogs' lives.
Yes.
It's like this dollhouse version of the world where we're controlling so many of the inputs and the physical environment where the dog is spending
Yes.
his or her time. And if we have that much control, whether it's with a leash or a gate, a fence, a muzzle, or just, hey, don't bring your kids over, or
Yeah.
if we have so much control, why should a dog be biting the kid's feet to begin with? But what also strikes me is that the sort of like where I think the way things are going in this country attitude of it, like sent a shiver through my spine, because I felt like it's this liberals versus conservatives kind of red state blue state caricature of the world, as seen through what to many people seems like a super niche area, dog training, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting that if we want to address dogs' behavior with empathy and compassion and management and not punishment, then we're snowflakes. And we're positive only cupcakes that don't understand that dogs have real life consequences. No, we understand. We just don't choose. We just choose not to use punishment. We choose to use science-based methods that work. So, yeah, you're right. I'm not going to put a knee collar on a dog and jack him to high heaven until he's afraid of children. I'm going to get to the core of what is happening. I'm going to address the emotion, not the behavior. Fuck the behavior. Let's work on the emotion first and see what we get then. And when we get the emotion, the behavior follows. Yeah, I don't like growling either, but I'm not going to shut it down because I want my dog to tell me what they're feeling, especially towards a child. Like, why? Oh, yeah, I love that we're snowflakes because we don't want to use punishment. But let's be real. Positive reinforcement isn't permissive. We just find a way to work through the behavior without punishing it. It doesn't mean that we're not going to let a dog run into traffic. It doesn't mean that if dogs are getting into fights, we're going to let them just duke it out until one's dead. It means that we are going to do what we need to do to get those dogs apart and to keep them safe, but we are not going to intentionally inflict pain in a behavior program.
I was just reading a book by Donna Haraway. It's called I'm trying to remember what it's called, The Companion Species Manifesto: Dogs, People, and Significant Otherness. And in it, she writes pretty extensively and in a very interesting way about Susan Garrett, who is certainly a hero of many positive reinforcement dog trainers, and especially in the agility world. She talks about Susan Garrett's training style. She describes it as positive bondage. It made me think also of how Walden 2, B.F. Skinner's novel, which is kind of like as if dog trainers ran the world, a dog trainer's utopia of how government should be, was described as fascism without tears. Goes back to this idea of like, just because we believe we should be working in the quadrant of positive reinforcement doesn't mean that anything goes. Well, this has been a super interesting conversation, and I think with the Gellman stuff, my first thought was like, what about management? My second thought was, have you ever read anything about operant conditioning and classical conditioning?
Right. I mean, that might be helpful. Like, there's a big guy here who his degree is in marketing, and one day he quit his job and became a dog trainer, and his rates he's proud of himself. Like, I am just stunned. And so in now we could probably go off on another tangent. He's a handsome man. And so everybody believes him. And I've gotten so many clients from him that are like, well, we tried him because he was just so charismatic. And I'm like, how'd that work out for you? Like, I hate that we are an unregulated industry. There isn't another industry that I can think of. Cars, hair, makeup, law, restaurants. Everyone has to have a license, and we don't. We're not regulated, and we have sentient beings, living animals, lives in our hands, and anybody can do anything
Living
they want to
animals
them.
that could kill
Yes.
and maim and do.
Yep.
I think where Gellman and Caesar Milan differ in my brain is like I kind of feel like there's what I call good dog training, and then there's sort of all the other stuff, which is, you know, aversive training, e-collar training, you know, balance training, dog whisperer type training. But the dog whisperer, I don't know, circle in that Venn diagram, it's not only just kind of poorly educated on punishment and conditioning. It's also filled with all this, what I generally think of as snake oil, and also, you know, sort of what you might call myths about pack theory and dominance, which touches into other areas of bad dog training too. But what really drives me crazy about the dog whisperer is the I don't know, like the last episode I saw of this most recent season, like the woman was holding her dog with her hand over the dog's back, and like this little dog, and he was like, well, clearly that's your issue. The hand should be held under the dog, not over the dog, because I can't even remember his rationale. But it was like, huh? It's like saying like the issue is like your dog has a blue collar on rather than a black collar. Like it just.
Yes. And the rationale of like so many of these balance trainers are like, well, it's your energy that is causing it. And I'm like, I know plenty of people that have reactive dogs and that are calm, cool as cucumbers, standing out there while their dog is lunging, barking, and reacting like fools on the end of the leash. And the human's energy is perfectly fine. We do not cause behavior problems. Humans do not cause behavior problems. Can we just agree that is a thing? Like,
yeah, and what's interesting about blaming the human is that I think it relates to some of the, you know, in that video, he talks about like, you know, rub essential oils on your feet, or, you know, like he's seeing the snake oil as, you know, the reductive practice of dropping kibble at a dog while they're, you know, going after a kid's foot or something.
right.
Where I see it in the, you know, these other ways, get the dog to never let the dog walk through the door before you, feed your dog, you know,
Oh yeah,
you know, eat your dog's food before you feed your own dog or whatever.
right.
Like I see all of that stuff as the woo. And I think there's a lot of that though in the actually I just listened to this podcast called The Dream, and the first season is about MLMs, like multi-level marketing, and the second season is about like the whole world of wellness. And one thing that both of those these two seasons of this podcast made me think about was how often people are blamed for failure that is in a situation where they're set up to fail, like in multi-level marketing. You know, chances are you are, you know, going to fail, but if you do, you're told, you know, you didn't try hard enough, you don't have a winner's mindset. And similarly with a lot of things in the world of wellness.
Yeah, it's so common. Like I will get people that are coming from balance trainers, you know, and I've gotten people that have come from other Force Free or R Plus or Lima trainers who they're like, hey, they didn't jive, or they just didn't work out. There's multiple reasons why people leave trainers, but a lot of the reasons I'll get is like, I got one the other day who was like, my dog is aggressing it at humans. And so we put an e-collar on and we stim when he's barking at humans, and it's not working anymore. It worked for a while, but it's not working anymore. So then I called the trainer and I said, hey, it's not working. Can we come do a session? They came out, did a session, and said, well, you're not doing it right. It's how you're doing it. It's your fault. And I'm like, well, maybe, like, sometimes it's implementation of the plan, right? But whenever I often hear, I get told that it was my fault, that I wasn't calm enough. I didn't do enough exercise. I didn't turn it up high enough. I didn't do it correctly. So I think we often, and I think it is very much our society, is that, well, if it doesn't work, we'll just blame someone else because it didn't work. Or we'll blame the client because it didn't work. Well, no, we have to figure out why it didn't work or why it's not working and how we can adjust that. Because if it has stopped working, then we have to find something else to do. Because the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk. What an interesting conversation.
I know it took quite a different path, I think, than we intended it to go in, but that's okay.
Thank you for hate watching Jeff Gellman with me. It was easier than doing it on my own. Do I need to watch more, or do you think I've had enough?
I think you've had enough. I don't think you need to watch anymore.
We're just the pretty snowflakes.
That's right. And I'm okay with that. I'm good with being a snowflake.
You can learn more about Beth at rehabyourrescue.com. She's also on Instagram at rehabyourrescue. Shortly after talking to Beth, I was thumbing through a book called The Kohler Method of Dog Training by William Kohler. He was a popular trainer. This book was written in 1977, and he doesn't talk about shock collars, but he does suggest some pretty extreme forms of punishment. For example, if a dog chews some siding off of your house, he suggests taking a big piece of siding, putting it in your dog's mouth, and then taping the dog's mouth closed until he has learned his lesson. If you come home and find your dog has dug a hole, he says, fill the hole brimful of water with the training collar and leash, bring the dog to the hole and shove his nose into the water, hold him there until he is sure he's drowning. If your dog is of any size, you may get all of the action of a cowboy bulldogging a steer. Stay with it. I've had elderly ladies who'd had their fill of ruined flower beds dunk some mighty big dogs. A great many dogs will associate this horrible experience with the hole they dug. However, to make sure of a permanent impression, fill the hole with water and repeat the experience the next day, whether the dog digs anymore or not. On the third day, let him watch you dig a hole and prepare it for a dunking. Class surveys have shown that more than 70% of the dogs who experience this correction for as many as 6 consecutive days swear off hole digging. If the master takes the first sign of repentance as a permanent change and stops the dunking after only a couple of days, failure is generally the result. Anyway, the thing that I noted more than his interesting methods was the way he echoes this idea of people being snowflakes if they're not willing to use punitive methods. He calls them wincers. This is from Lesson 1, Fables and Foibles of his book Dog Training. It's a section where he's talking about dealing with people who think your methods might be too harsh. Because you, in influencing your dog to be happy, composed, and well-behaved in public places, must do some of your final polishing in distracting situations open to scrutiny. It is inevitable that you be bothered by overly sensitive spectators. It is important that you be equipped to deal with these eyebrow archers, and deal with them you must, lest you be confused by their protests and weakened in your purpose of thoroughly training your dog. The supersensitive observers are quote-unquote kindly people, most of whom take after a kindly parent or an aunt who, quote, had a dog that was almost human and understood every word that was said without being trained. They range over most of the civilized world. Generally, one or more will be found close to where dogs are being worked. They often operate individually, but inflict their greatest cruelties when amalgamated into societies. They easily recognize each other by their smiles, which are as dried syrup on yesterday's pancakes. Their most noticeable habits are wincing when dogs are effectually corrected and smiling approvingly at each other when a dozen ineffective corrections seem only to fire a dog's maniacal attempts to hurl his anatomy within reach of another dog that could maim him in one brief skirmish. Their common calls are, quote, I couldn't do that, and oh my. They have no mating call. This is easily understood. When bothered by such critical observations, you will find the most effective counter-irritant to be a proffered leash and a loud invitation such as, here, show me. If the dog appears a bit formidable, the wincer is certain to hurry away. Better still, let's use the initiative of a good general and hit the source of the misinformation which they would use to discredit your efforts. Take a look at some of the things that have been written in books and magazines. A really good look. This experience not only will prepare you for evaluating the comments and suggestions that come from the sidelines, but also will give you confidence of action necessary for training a dog. Magazines have dignified the prattle of quote-unquote dog psychologists who would rob the dog of a birthright that he has in common with all of God's creatures, the right to the consequences of his own action. There will always be more emphasis and clarity to be had in the contrast between punishment and reward than from the technique of quote-unquote only good, and if they obey, quote-unquote still more good. And there is more meaning and awareness of living in a life that knows the consequences of both favorable and unfavorable action. So let's not deprive the dog of his privilege of experiencing the consequences of both right and wrong. One of my favorite things to do with dogs is to watch them figure out how to problem solve. I like watching them figure out how to navigate the world that we're asking them to live in and to have fun while doing it. At School for the Dogs, we specialize in selling enrichment toys for dogs. These are also sometimes called work-to-eat toys. They can help a dog refine their problem-solving abilities, can help them burn off physical and mental energy in a way that is not destructive. It can help slow down their eating, and it can also just help them enjoy themselves. I kind of think puzzle toys might be the canine equivalent of playing Fortnite or doing the crossword. School for the Dogs' new Brainy Box is a monthly subscription box where every month we will send you one of our favorite canine enrichment toys along with one of our favorite types of treats. You will only receive things that have been vigorously tested by our staff and student body. Sign up today at schoolforthedogs.com/brainybox. For a limited time, you can get 15% off your first month or your payment for the full first year when you use the code BrainyBox15.
School for the dogs.
Thank you so much for listening, and special thanks to Bill and Lizzie of Toast Garden for the amazing theme song. You can find Toast Garden at youtube.com/toastgarden. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review on iTunes. You can also support us by shopping at storeforthedogs.com, and you can learn more about us at schoolforthedogs.com. You can also connect with other listeners by downloading our brand new app. Just visit schoolforthedogs.com/community.